Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to part two of our suspense lesson related to the monkey's paw. So we're going to do our close reading right now. So you can, if you're able to do this, open up the monkey's paw close read as I read it. You can follow along in the video. Um, but we're going to have some reading goals here today. Now, you don't have to sit down and like print this out and highlight it or put it in the PDF cabinet or anything. But I want you to think is, what are the suspenseful lines or the suspenseful parts of this passage? So the following passage comes from the end of the monkey's paw. So if you remember back to the summary, this is after the second wish, where they wish for their son Herbert back. And if you remember, the interesting part about that wish, Herbert had already passed away. So this is the interaction between Mr. and Mrs. White after Mr. White makes his second wish, I have a typo here, I'm sorry about that, to bring their son Herbert back to life. "What's that?" cried the old woman, sitting up quickly. "A rat," said the old man shakily. "A rat. It passed me on the stairs." His wife sat up in bed listening. A loud knock echoed through the house. "It's Herbert!" she screamed. "It's Herbert!" She ran to the door, but her husband was there before her, and catching her by the arm, held her tightly. "What are you going to do?" he asked in a low, scared voice. "It's my boy! It's Herbert!" she cried, struggling automatically. "I forgot it was 2 miles away. What are you holding me for? Let go. I must open the door." She's talking about the graveyard here, about being 2 miles away. Sorry for that interjection. "For God's sake, don't let it in," cried the old man, shaking with fear. "You're afraid of your own son?" she cried, struggling. "Let me go. I'm coming, Herbert. I'm coming." There's another knock, and another. The old woman with a sudden pull broke free and ran from the room. Her husband followed to the top of the stairs and called after her as she hurried down. He heard the chain pulling and the bottom lock opened. The old woman's voice, desperate and breathing heavily. "The top lock!" she cried loudly. "Come down! I can't reach it!" But her husband was on his hands and knees, feeling around wildly on the floor in search of the paw. If only he could find it before the thing outside got in. The knocks came quickly, now echoing through the house, and he heard the noise of his wife moving in a chair and putting it down against the floor. He heard the movement of the lock as she began to open it, and at the same moment he found the monkey's paw and frantically breathed his third and last wish. The knocking suddenly stopped, although the echoes of it were still in the house. He heard the chair pulled back and the door opened. A cold wind blew up the staircase, whoosh, and a long, loud cry of disappointment and pain for his wife gave him the courage to run downstairs to her side, and then to the gate. The street light opposite shone on a quiet and deserted road. So I want you guys to think about this. How is Mr. White's reaction to the knocking and the whole idea of this last part different from Mrs. White's? How does that add to the suspense? I mean, we can even look back in here. Look at the words she used to describe. "A rat," the old man shakily. "What's that?" cried the old woman. "It's Herbert," she screamed. Now looking, she's screaming, she's crying, but Mr. White, "What are you going to do?" in a low, scared voice. She's struggling, while he is, again, shaking with fear. So how are their reactions to this different? How does that help build suspense? So what creates suspense in the reader during the end of the story? What is the reader uncertain about? Because that's what suspense is. It's what are we uncertain at the end of the story here? And what are we waiting to see as the reader as we hear that knocking, as Mrs. White is emotionally running towards to open the door? What are we waiting to see, and how does that get resolved? Now, notice I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm not giving a lot of answers. Might be frustrating for some of you, because you guys are all smart people. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to go into this. You guys are going to do some analysis. So some of those same questions. What creates suspense in the reader during the end of the story? What's the reader uncertain about? And what is the reader waiting to see? And how is the suspense in the story finally resolved? So I have those 4 questions. I'd like you to answer the prompts in about 2 to 4 sentences. Use details from the text. I'll give you some sentence starters here to kind of get you going if you need help with that. But really, the job is for you to show how does that story demonstrate suspense at the end. I think you guys are going to do a great job with that. Now, if you get to the end of today's work and you're like, "Oh, that was really awesome, but I wish there was more," here's some extension activities. These are optional. These are not graded. Loading, loading, loading. And I have the full text of the Monkey's Paw. So if you want to go back and read, if you thought the ending was awesome, and I'm sorry if I ruined the ending, but if you want to go back and read the whole thing, that's here. It's a really great story if you have time to do it. This one's also a little creative. So I'm going to give you some creative pieces to work on this week. So the Monkey's Paw contains situational irony. When the characters make a wish, the outcomes are not what the audience or the characters expected. The wishes always turn out poorly. And this is a common trope in storytelling. You've probably seen the Monkey's Paw at some point. I know that Simpsons did it. There's that classic line. Simpsons did it. Other shows have taken that idea. So in this creative writing activity, imagine you or a friend come across the Monkey's Paw. You decide against a better judgment to make a wish. I want you to describe the wish and what would the ironic outcome be. So here's an example. Say I, Mr. Enoch, grab the Monkey's Paw, and I wish for a brand new 100-inch plasma television. It shows up at my door the next day. And I spend all day setting up the television. But Netflix, Hulu, and all other streaming services turn out to not work on this particular television set. Now that one's got a little bit of irony in it. It's not great, but that's the one I came up with. What's one you guys come up with? I'm excited to see. I know you guys are really creative people. So that's our lessons for today. This one ran a little bit longer than I like it to, but I hope you guys are doing well. If you need anything, please reach out. I'm here to help.